will continue with our first panel, which is about Hungarian Judaism in history. Let me introduce our speakers, who will be Professor Yehuda Hartman from the Bar Ilan University. He will be joined with Professor Menachem Karen-Kratz, who is an independent scholar from Israel. Please join the table. Also, they will be joined with György Szabó, who is the president of the Hungarian Jewish Heritage for Public Endowment. And his speech will be translated by Péter Morvai. The first panel will be led by David Martin Jones, who is the director of research at the Danube Institute. Please join the panel.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I was born in Budapest after the war. My parents and grandparents were also born in Hungary. As a child, I heard my mother often wondering, how did it happen that in February 1944, we Jews sat in cafes and went to the opera, not aware of the imminent danger? Why were we sure that the Holocaust will not touch Hungary? Why did we trust the Hungarian authorities and the Hungarian people? Later that year, my father, my mother, and her parents took refuge in the glass house in Vadász utca with many other Jews. After October 1944, when the Aerocross party came into power, the glass house was a fragile island of relative safety during the raging terror in Budapest. It was under the auspices of the Swiss diplomat Karl Lutz and housed several thousand Jews. Life was extremely tight. It was a big glass factory, not equipped for living, and lacked food supplies. People were living for weeks and even for months in cellars and storage halls. The place was recognized by the Szálasi regime as a diplomatic exterritorial site. However, in December, a group of Aerocross militiamen burst in and took a number of Jews, including my parents, to be shot at the Danube. My mother was in her 6 months of pregnancy with me. As they approached the river, a heavy American air attack aiming to destroy the bridges began, and as everybody ran away to take cover, the Jews managed to hide among the ruins and eventually returned to the glass house. The huge gap between what Hungarian Jews felt and thought early in 1944 and the events that followed that the same year has ever since intrigued me. Around the middle of the 19th century, Hungary sought to unite the multi-ethnic and multi-faith nation under the Hungarian national flag by strengthening the Magyar component of its character. To this end, it invited the minorities to join the Magyar national body through the process of Magyarization, based on the adoption of the Hungarian language and culture and identification with the national goals. This embracing and inclusive nationalism sought to extend the boundaries of the nation. Most Jews enthusiastically joined the project of Magyarization, showing a particularly high level of loyalty to the state. After the emancipation of 1867, there existed an unwritten contract between the dominant elite and the Jews based on the grant of equal rights in return for Magyarization. Some call it the social contract of emancipation. The Jewish contribution to the national goal of modernizing the economy and their Magyarization process was favored by the ruling elite. In official statistical surveys, they were counted as Magyars, unlike the other ethnic national minorities. The monarchic era marked a peak in linguistic acculturation and patriotic identification among the Jews of Hungary. The prevailing atmosphere of peace and calm and the sense of progress in many fields of life encouraged Jews to regard themselves as an integral part of the country. In 1914, the New York-based Yiddish Daily Forward published a long article entitled "The Jews in Hungary." The article presented an idyllic picture of the community of Hungary, of the Jewish community of Hungary. Hungary is a paradise for Jews. Nowhere in the world do Jews love the country as they do in Hungary. Love of the country and its culture is so great that they have abandoned the Yiddish language. The picture painted by the article is not historically accurate, but it is an accurate reflection of Hungary's image. Prior to First World War, to outside observers, as well as to its Jewish population, Hungarian Jews indeed seem to be deeply patriotic and living in unparalleled conditions. Surprisingly, the attitude towards the country and its people shaped during the dualist period essentially persisted the First World War, despite a significant deterioration in the condition of the Jews. Fighting in the First World War was conceived by Jews as heroism, natural duty, and as a religious obligation. Jews participated enthusiastically in the war. Despite this record, they were accused of evading military service and of exploiting the war economy for profiteering. Following the defeat of the Central Powers, the economic development and prosperity of the monarchic era gave way to a profound socio-economic crisis that persisted in varying degrees until the Second World War. Broad circles of Hungarian society believed that the origins of the crisis lay in the preceding era. The Jews were identified with liberalism, democracy, and capitalism, and accordingly were held responsible for the defeat and for the difficulties of the post-war period. The Jewish question gradually came to occupy a central place on the public and political agenda. One of the first manifestations of this was the numerous clause law, the first act of anti-Semitic legislation enacted in Europe following the First World War. The perception of the Jew as the other by Hungarian society strengthened. Despite this, there was no significant change in the image conveyed by the Jewish leadership and the Jewish press. An ever-widening gulf opened up between the Jews' self-perception as members of the Magyar nation, as manifested in the public domain, and the manner in which they were regarded by the surrounding society. The Jewish press continued to convey a sentiment of dual Jewish-Magyar identity and a sense of confidence and trust in Hungary. In 1944, severe distress began to spread within Hungarian Jewry as rumors spread concerning the events beyond the borders, and as Hungarian Jews met refugees who had escaped the inferno. On the 10th of February 1944, Dezső Korein, a noted publicist and a member of the National Orthodox Committee, wrote in the Orthodox Jewish Újság, "In our times, Hungary has been swept into an unprecedented situation, unparalleled since the creation of the world." That's the way they write. Enormous forces are clashing against each other, war of all against all. Yet, like the burning bush in the Bible, so our dear homeland stands at the center of the global conflagration. The flames of Jew hatred lick the nation's border, but the firm rock wall of the Magyar humanity and tolerance does not permit the barbaric hate to penetrate the country. After the war, Hungary will gain eternal fame thanks to its sublime thought and humanity. This article appeared just 6 weeks before the beginning of the Holocaust in Hungary. Hungary was still perceived as a bastion of safety and a dear homeland. The author was well aware of the disaster unfolding in the region, but he was convinced that the Jews in the old country are immune to the threat. He compared Hungary to the biblical burning bush, engulfed in flames but not consumed. Europe was burning, but Hungarian Jewry stood safe at its center. The idyllic picture of the past has been nurtured for many decades, now served as a source of hope. The Hungarian people would gain eternal admiration for their humanity and nobility in preventing the devastation of their Jewish population. He was well aware of the fate of his brethren in the neighboring countries, but sincerely believed that the catastrophe would not reach Hungary. Why did Jews continue to nurture this idyllic picture of the past, even as it became increasingly inconsistent with the present? Was this an illusion, a wishful thinking, or did it have some roots in reality? Well, despite the hostile social atmosphere and the anti-Jewish legislation, not all governments in the interwar period possessed pro-German and anti-Semitic leanings. Even those that did refrain from adopting an overt anti-Jewish language of Nazi Germany. Official expressions of anti-Semitism in Hungary were usually phrased in vague terms and were often portrayed as an attempt to please the radical right and Nazi Germany. They were often accepted with understanding by the Jewish leadership. As a result, even in the late 1930s, it was possible to believe that the authorities did not present a threat to the Jews. At the beginning of 1944, there was even a modest cultural revival among the Jews with official approval. Some restriction of the Zionist activities were removed. Throughout the war years, Hebrew books were published in Budapest, Debrecen, Munkács, and Kolozsvár. The policies of Prime Minister Kállai, who rejected Hitler's demands for severe anti-Jewish actions, further encouraged the hope that the national leadership would maintain its course. Naturally, such feelings were accompanied by anxiety and uncertainty. Hungary was under German influence, and it was unclear how long the uneasy equilibrium could be maintained. The attachment of Jews to Hungary had more reasons. One motive for the tendency of Jews to emphasize and flaunt patriotic sentiments was that the Jews of Hungary comprised of an immigrant society. About 90% of Jews were descendants of immigrants to the country during the 18th and 19th centuries. It is reasonable to assume that this heightened the desire to feel belonging and be accepted. Jews sought to convince themselves and their surroundings that they were not aliens, but loyal and devoted members of the nation. Hungarian Jews regarded themselves as partners in creating a new national society rather than arriving newcomers in an existing national body. The conviction that Hungarian nationhood was a joint project heightened their identification with the nation. The Jews played a role in disseminating the Hungarian language and culture in remote provinces with a majority of non-Magyar population. The involvement of Jews in the national economy facilitated their rapid integration and further created a bond with the country. Recognition of the contribution of Hungarian Jews to the economy did not prevent legislative initiative to curtail their presence in economic life. However, the authorities were concerned that unless the Jewish public showed a measure of acceptance of the laws, the nation's already unstable economy could deteriorate to a dangerous level. In 1938, former Prime Minister István Betlen spoke in the parliament against the adoption of the extreme wing ideas in solving the Jewish question. Following the Nazi manner in Hungary, he said, will immediately disrupt the economic and financial order. The frequent demonstrations of patriotism served also as a defensive strategy. Repeated accusations of anti-Semites concerning Jewish disloyalty led them to emphasize and perhaps exaggerate their patriotic declarations. The Orthodox faced accusations that they were not sufficient Hungarian from two directions, both from anti-Semites and from their neolog brethren. Accordingly, they felt a particular need to flaunt their national affinity in public. All these factors, combined with the feeling that the war was nearing its end, encouraged the basic assumption that the Hungarian government, which had so far refused to participate in the final solution, would maintain this position. Nazi Germany had hitherto allowed its ally to manage its domestic affairs independently. Soon after Nazi Germany took control of Hungary, Jews were concentrated in ghettos and sent to Auschwitz. This process was implemented with extensive assistance of the local Hungarian authorities in the various provinces. Adolf Eichmann's team, devoted to implement the final solution in Hungary, comprised of about 150 members. Without local assistance, it could not possibly have gathered so many Jews from so many parts of the country in less than 2 months. Over a period of 56 days in the spring of 1944, more than 500,000 Jews were sent for extermination out of the total population of 850,000. The enthusiastic participation of large numbers of bureaucrats, gendarmes, police officers, and other Hungarians raises questions about the idyllic picture of the past. The Jews faced serious social rejection, economic hardship, and hostile legislation, but they felt physically safe and hoped this would continue to be the case until the end of the war. This assessment was not confined to the Jews of Hungary. Even in 1944, many persecuted Jews across the continent still regarded the country as a safe refuge and fled to its borders. However, these hopes were shattered following the German invasion and the extensive collaboration between the Hungarians and the Nazis. The last issue of the Orthodox Jewish Uyshag is dated March 20, 1944. The issue was devoted to the upcoming festival of Passover, the Festival of Freedom, and its pages are peppered with advertisements for matzah, kosher wine, and other items for the holiday. Nothing in the content or appearance of the paper suggested that this would be the final issue of the newspaper. A period of relative security for 850,000 Jews ended in an instant. As the columns of the final issue show, the committee was taken completely by surprise. For generations, Jews lived in an environment that was both anti-Semitic and tolerant. Their condition fluctuated according to the balance between these two poles. The Jews were a small, weak, and defenseless minority, and their opponents could easily have rid themselves of their presence had they so wished. For the most part, however, the impulse of rejection was balanced by the impulse of acceptance. When this balance was undermined, the result was expulsion, persecution, and pogroms. This delicate balance was reflected in Hungary after the outbreak of the Second World War. Against the hostile forces from various directions, balancing forces, particularly from the Hungarian elite, allowed the Jewish community to continue to live in reasonable conditions. The German invasion finally and fatally tipped off the scales tip of the scales. But from the perspective of Hungarian Jews, even at the beginning of 1944, it was difficult to anticipate the dramatic turning point that lay ahead. Thank you very much.
So, good evening, everybody. My name is Menachem Keren Kratz. I was born and raised in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm an Israeli. I'm a Zionist. But more than everything, I'm a Jew. My parents, as well as their ancestors, are Hungarian Jews from the region of Transylvania, and they belong to the Orthodox community in that region in the last 200 years. So this is basically one of the reasons why I focused my research on Jewish Hungarian Orthodoxy, and I do hope that by next year my book in English on Hungarian Orthodoxy will be published, and then everybody would know what they need to know about this particular and interesting group. When Professor Kaplan invited me to speak at the conference a year and a half ago, he asked me to speak about anti-Zionism. And we now know, and we have heard that by the ambassador, about the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Israeli attitudes and anti-Semitism. And the question that interested me was, what are we to make out about those three topics? I mean, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, and anti-Semitism, when they are voiced not by non-Jews, but when they are voiced by Jews, okay? How do we treat, how do we consider Jewish people who speak against the Jewish state, even against the very existence of the Jewish state? Are they anti-Semitic? Are they anti-Israeli? That's a complicated question. I mean, they are Jews, so apparently they cannot be anti-Semitic, or can they? So this was a fascinating question which I dealt in that conference. And if you're interested to know what I thought about it, then you'll have to buy the book and read my article, because this is not what I'm going to speak about, okay? What I'm going to speak about today, because I didn't want to bore myself, I wanted to select a new topic. I'm going to speak about the connection between Hungarian Jewry, the history of Hungarian Jewry, particularly of Hungarian Orthodoxy, and the concept of Jewish anti-Zionism. So this will be my topic, and I will take you like a bird's eye review of all sorts of historical and social perspective, in which I'll cover a history of more or less 100 to 200 years. So this is going to be really a quick review. So if you look at the map here, we see early 19th century. We see the situation of Jews in Eastern Europe, actually in all of Europe. We see the majority of Jews were in the Russian Empire, about 4 million Jews, about 180 in Galicia, about 100,000 in Hungary, and about 1.3 million in let's call it Poland, and the rest a smaller community is in other European countries. If we look at the end of that century, which means less than 100 years from that time, we'll see this situation. The number of Jews in the Russian Empire rose to 5.3 million, which means over 1.5 million Jews were added to that population. You see what happened in Galicia? The Jewish population has grown fivefold. But when we look at Hungary, we see that the Jewish population is increased by ninefold, okay, from 100,000 to almost 1 million Jews. So this had a lot of implications about the Jewish community in Hungary, and is part of the explanation why Hungarian Jewry and the legacy of Hungarian Jewry is different to that any other Jewish community in the world, particularly with respect to religious aspects. This was not, we can see here that the rise of Jews in Europe beginning in the early 19th century till the end of the century, rose from 2 million to 10 million in Europe, which is in green, and we are not even considering the couple of million Jews who immigrated from Eastern Europe to the United States at that time. So, how did this influence Hungarian Jewry? To understand that, we will look at some schematic description of the Jewish community in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. So we can see the 15th, 17th century, there's a small Jewish community who is relatively small, who has a strong communal authority and is more or less traditional, which means it's more or less homogeneous in terms of religious customs. Then we have the 18th century. The community grows, there are more people, more Jews, and they are getting more diverse. And we see the first signs of greater variation. Not all the Jews are observant. There are some modernized Jews. There's a growing number of acculturated Jews, and this influenced the general Jewish community. Those are processes which are going throughout Eastern Europe. We are going further on to the beginning of the 19th century. Then the Jewish community still continues to grow. And by the beginning till the middle of the 19th century, we have, like within the Jewish community, we can see that two groups emerge. The one is the Orthodox group, who adheres to the customs of the old times and still observe the halacha. And then there is a large group of non-Orthodox Jews. Some of them adopt the Reform type of Judaism, other one accept other form of beliefs, modernist beliefs, secular beliefs, socialistic beliefs, all sorts of other beliefs which are not Orthodox. We have that in the mid-19th century, the situation as I explained, but now we are arriving at Hungary. What happens in Hungary is unique because it didn't happen in other countries as well. In the mid-19th century, the Hungarian government, for reasons which I cannot discuss now, but it allowed the Jewish community to be separated as if Jews had different denominations. So we have different communities for Orthodox Jews and different community for non-Orthodox Jews. So Hungary was the only country in the world in which this happened on a national level. It happened in several communities in Germany, but not on a national level. On a national level, Hungary was unique in that sense. So now we have Jews of two kinds living in Hungary, the non-Orthodox and the Orthodox. Times go by, 10, 20 years, and now within the Orthodox community, we are beginning to see that the Orthodox community in itself is beginning to be divided between the mainstream Orthodox, who are more lenient, they are more modern, they are usually non-Hasidic, and they are more prone to integrate with the surrounding society. And then we have a smaller group, which I call extreme orthodoxy, which they look unfavorably on the non-Orthodox Jews, but also on mainstream orthodoxy. And they look at them and say, look, you are too modernized, you are dressed like the Gentiles, you read the Gentile books, you read the Gentile newspaper, so you are not true Jews. Okay? We are the true Jews because we are still continue to maintain the tradition, while you have gone astray from the real tradition, the real Jewish tradition. So this is group which I call extreme orthodoxy. Okay? So now, let us look at this process from a social perspective. We spoke about it from a historical perspective. From a social perspective, what we call the traditional Jewish society was simple in structure. We had like a majority of Jewish society who is traditional. On the top level, we have the rabbis, the spiritual leaders or political leaders. And let's say at the bottom, we have a group of sinners and dissidents and those who are on the fringe of the community. But this is a simple sociological structure. But as the Jewish population grows, we are having a more complex structure of society. We have the Jewish society in itself is getting divided between two major camps, the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox. So in the Orthodox, we have the rabbis, we have mainstream Orthodoxy, we have like more modern Orthodox, and we have like a traditional who are Orthodox when they practice, but they not always practice Orthodox, yet they are considered to be a part of the Orthodox Jew, like in many communities nowadays, that there are people who are not practicing Orthodox Judaism, but when they need to go to the synagogue, they prefer to go to the Orthodox rather than to the non-Orthodox synagogue. On the other hand, we have the non-Orthodox community led by Reform rabbis, Reform Jews, and at the bottom, what is for them considered the bottom, is those who are far away from Judaism, even in terms of Reform Judaism. So in order for this group to be differentiated, one needs to come up with a divider. Okay, what's differentiate between the two groups? So the Orthodox, when they decided that they were a different group, they had their own idea what should be the divide line between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox, and that was the Jewish halacha. That was reflected in all sorts of ideas, like, for example, if you look at the structure of a neolog synagogue, it looks differently, and they had an organ, and the organ is not kosher, so this signifies that it's not according to the halacha, so which means that the whole community is not going according to halacha because of that particular organ is a symbol to that deviation. But then we have another group. We have this extreme orthodoxy. So when the extreme orthodoxy wants to differentiate itself between them and mainstream orthodoxy, so what should be the divide? What should tell apart who are the extreme orthodox and who are mainstream orthodox? Is it going to be the degree of the observance? Well, it's not so clear. It's not something that is easy to define. Is that the appearance? I mean, if people dress more modern, then they are less orthodox than other one. This is not also wasn't clear. Is that the fact that Orthodox Jews had more general education and the other one had less general education? Well, that doesn't work either, because they were like very Orthodox Jews, like the Khatam Sofer, the most famous and most radical Hungarian rabbi, who in himself was an educated person. He wrote literature, he wrote poetry, he read the German newspaper, so he must be included in the group. So we cannot say the general education is something which can divide between the two groups. is it belonging to Hasidism? Again, this didn't work as well, because again, for example, Khatam Sofer, he was not a Hasid, so we cannot rule him over as not being orthodox enough. So the question remained open: what divides between the extreme Orthodox and mainstream Orthodoxy? So luck came to the help of the extreme Orthodox, and the Zionist movement was established in 1897. And now, hop, was the solution. Now it was Zionism. Zionism was something that was easy to define, and it was a clear line which could differentiate between the extreme Orthodox and mainstream Orthodox. If you have any connection with Zionism, either directly or indirectly, or even if you speak to someone who is a Zionist, then that means that you are not a complete Orthodox Jew. Okay? So this was a clear line which enabled the extreme Orthodox to differentiate themselves. If we go further on, return to the historical scheme, then we see that before the Holocaust, Jewish society in general had non-Orthodox Jewry, had Orthodox Jewry, and a small group of extreme Orthodoxy. After the Holocaust, we had four major Jewish groups in terms of religiosity: the non-Orthodox Jewry, Zionist Orthodoxy, ultra-Orthodoxy, and extreme Orthodoxy. And if we look at that, how they regard Zionism, we can see that there are four types of reaction to Zionism. For most of the non-Orthodox Jews, I mean, in the sense of non-Orthodox, I'm also speaking about non-practicing Orthodox Jews, the secular Jews, etc. Most of them are pro-Zionist, and they regard Zionism as a national idea. Then we have the Zionist Orthodox, or what I call the religious Zionists, for whom Zionism is a religious idea. It's not just a national idea, it's a religious idea. Then you have the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, who are non-Zionist. I mean, they don't recognize the Zionist agenda, but they accept Zionism as a practical solution. So you can see here a famous yeshiva in Bnei Barak who raises the Israeli flag one day each year on the Day of Independence. This is the only yeshiva who does it. But this is symbol how they regard the Zionist idea. And then at the end we have the extreme Orthodox groups which regard the Israeli flag and the Israeli entity with the non-entry sign, which means they're absolutely against everything which has to do with Zionism. I was planning to give you all the example, all the explanation why extreme Orthodox are so much against Zionism, but we don't have time for that. So I'll just jump up to the conclusion, and we can see here in these three pictures the Orthodox version of redemption at the end of time. Basically, redemption is made up of three stages: God vengeance at the Gentiles. This was a Haggadah which was printed after the Holocaust, so you can understand that sentiment. Then God redeems the Jewish people, and then the Jewish people come to the land of Israel by the hands of God. But when we look at the next picture, we see the Zionist concept of redemption. And we see the Jewish people goes to Jerusalem, but who is the one who is bringing them to Jerusalem? It's not the Almighty God, but our Hungarian friend, Mr. Herzl. He is the one who is redeeming the Jewish people. And this is something that the extreme Orthodox could not bear to see and to realize. So basically, now we know the connection between Hungarian Orthodoxy, in particular Hungarian extreme Orthodoxy, and why so many Jews are so much against Zionism and against the Jewish state, and the question whether they're anti-Semitic or not, that has to be seen. Conclusion. Jewish anti-Zionism is based not only on theological reasoning, but also on a socio-political one, as we have seen before. It was the theology was involved with social construction. While most ultra-Orthodox Jews came to terms with Zionism with the state of Israel, like for nowadays we have the ultra-Orthodox party in Israel, they're having 2 ministers in the government, which means they are fully participant in what goes on in the country. For the extreme Orthodox, anti-Zionism is a fundamental principle, so they are very much against that. The concept of extreme Orthodoxy was established and developed in Hungary, and thus contemporary Jewish anti-Zionism is a clear outcome of Hungarian Orthodoxy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. That was very stimulating and probably very provocative. So, we'll turn now to György Szabo, the president of the Hungarian Jewish Heritage of Public Endowment, MASOK, which has done a lot of work and serves Holocaust survivors in Hungary. So this is going to be translated for us because György's talking in Hungarian.
Jó napot kívánok mindenkinek!
Welcome to everybody.
Szabó György vagyok, a Magyarországi Zsidó Örökség Közalapítvány elnöke.
My name is György Szabó, the president of the Hungarian Jewish Heritage of Public Endowment in Hungary.
Most már nagyon ördögien érzem magamat itt az elmúlt negyed óra után.
I feel a little bit strange after the last 40-something minutes.
Haza fogok menni, és megnézem, hogy nőttek-e szarvaim, vagy kénkövet hányok-e.
I need to go home and to look into the mirror to check if I have horns on my head.
Extrém ember vagyok-e, vagy ultra vagyok-e.
Where do I belong? To the extreme group or the ultra group?
Ugye sokan ismernek a közönségben, nem hiszem, hogy extrém, deviáns ember lennék, annak ellenére, hogy ortodox zsidó vagyok.
But I know that many of the audience know me and do know that I'm not an extreme
Mindazzal együtt, hogy csak 2-szer sebesültem meg az izraeli hadseregben.
And I've got injured in the Israeli army 2 times.
De ettől deviáns, anti-izraeli, ortodox, így néz ki egy csúnya anti-izraeli ortodox zsidó.
But just look at me. This is how an ugly anti-Israeli Orthodox Jew looks like.
És magyar is ráadásul.
Who is accidentally Hungarian as well.
Nos, de visszatérve arra, ami miatt ide jöttem.
But let me just return to the topic I was invited to come.
Ugye a Magyarországi Zsidó Örökség Közalapítvány
The Hungarian Jewish Heritage of Public Endowment
1997-ben alakult.
Has been established in 1997.
Ugye a Párizsi békeszerződés értelmében.
According to the Paris Peace Treaty.
És ugye a fő célja, ugye a meghatározott céljaik természetesen ugye a holokauszt túlélők kell való foglalkozás, különös tekintettel a kárpótlási ügyekre.
And its main mission is to promote and manage repatriation for the Holocaust survivors.
És ugye ezt követően, vagy emellett a magyarországi zsidó kulturális élet helyreállítása, bármennyire is lehetetlen ez, ugye a holokauszt előtti időszakra.
And however, it is difficult, but are also responsible for the restoration of Jewish heritage and cultural life in Hungary.
Ugye amikor mielőtt elindultam, azért ellenőriztem, hogy hány magyar, Magyarországon élő, holokauszt túlélő van még közöttünk.
And before I came here, I just quickly checked how many Holocaust survivors do we have among us.
Ugye a szám megdöbbentően alacsony, 3784 holokauszt túlélő van már csak.
The number is shockingly low, 3,884.
84. Ugye a teendő, amit teszünk, természetesen ugye meglehetősen nagy és szertágazó ebben a tekintetben.
We have manifold activities in this regard.
Hiszen életjáradékot biztosítunk a holokauszt túlélőknek.
We provide payments for the Holocaust survivors.
És természetesen a magyar kormánnyal karöltve ugye folytatjuk a tárgyalásokat a nemzetközi szervezetekkel, akik ugye holokauszt ügyben mozognak még a mai napig.
And in accordance with in cooperation with the Hungarian government, we do work with international organizations that deal with the support of the Holocaust survivors on the international level.
Ugye annak érdekében, hogy a életben lévő 3784 holokauszt túlélő életét meg tudjuk édesíteni.
In order to help the remaining life of those Holocaust survivors, 3,884 people who are still living in Hungary, to help them.
Nyilván ugye nagyon fontos feladat ugye a hazai zsidó civil élet támogatása.
Of course, it is a very important aspect of our work to support the Hungarian Jewish civil life.
És ugye szinte el lehet mondani, hogy ugye a mazsök egy nagyon erős támasza a zsidó szervezetnek, nem vallásos zsidó szervezeteknek Magyarországon.
And I need to tell that Mazsök, our organization, is a strong supporter of the non-Orthodox Jewish civil societies in Hungary.
Hiszen ugye minden évben 200 millió forintot osztunk szét a civil szervezetek között, akár működésükre, akár a projektjeik lebonyolítására.
We do provide an annual grant of 200 million Hungarian forints among these organizations.
Éppen másfél órával ezelőtt döntöttünk 62 civil szervezetnek a 2023-as támogatásáról.
Just this afternoon, we have decided more than the support of 60 Hungarian groups for this year.
És ugye 2 hét múlva döntünk körülbelül 240 zsidó témájú projektnek a sorsáról, amit szintén a mi részfinanszírozásukkal fognak megvalósulni.
And in just 2 weeks' time, we are going to decide about more than 200 projects that will be also supported by us.
Ugye nagyon nagy feladat, ami még ránk hárul, illetve foglalkozunk vele az elmúlt években, ugye a Magyarországon található elhagyott zsidó temetők fölújítása, illetve megtalálása.
Also, an important part of our work, the restoration of the abandoned Jewish cemeteries in Hungary and localization of them.
Ugye amikor 11 évvel ezelőtt ugye elkezdtem a Mazsökben való pályafutásomat.
When just 11 years ago I started my work at the Mazsök.
1440 elhagyott zsidó temetőről tudtunk hazánkban.
We had the knowledge of 1440 abandoned Jewish cemeteries in Hungary.
Ma ez a szám már erősen 1600 fölött található.
But today I can tell you that we know about 1600 cemeteries in Hungary.
Hiszen jóformán lehet azt mondani, hogy nem telik el úgy hónap, hogy ugye 2-3 zsidó temető elő ne bukkanjon az ország valamely területén.
Practically in every month, 2-3 new cemeteries we can locate in Hungary, in different parts of the country.
Ugye előbb hallottunk ezekről a csúnya magyar ortodox zsidókról.
Just we have heard some stories about these so-called ugly Hungarian Orthodox Jews.
Akik ugye ennek az ország és ugye általában Kelet-Európának a történetében nagyon mély benyomást tettek.
who all have made a deep impact in the history of Hungary and the history of Eastern Europe,
kultúrában,
both in culture
a művészetekben,
and in arts,
az oktatásban.
education,
És ugye lehet ezt még tovább sorolni.
and we can just continue.
Ugye a zsidó temetők általában ugye a legjobb lenyomata az elmúlt 300-400 év Magyarországának.
The Jewish cemeteries reflect maybe the past 200-300 years of the life in Hungary.
Hiszen ezekben a temetőkben lehet végigkövetni a magyar településeknek, a magyar társadalomnak a folyamatos fejlődését, a folyamatos növekedését, a polgáriasodását, hiszen ezek a temetők érintetlenül maradtak ugye az 1700 éves évek elejétől, közepétől kezdve.
And just because these cemeteries have been left untouched since the beginning of the 18th century, these cemeteries reflect the life, the civil life of the country in many aspects.
De jelen pillanatban a meglévő egy kicsit több mint 1600 temetőből ugye 115-120 temetőnek a gondozását, felújítását tudtuk megtenni ugye az elmúlt 2 évben.
In the past 2 years, out of these 1600 cemeteries, we could provide the restoration and maintenance of about 115-120 cemeteries.
És ugye természetesen reméljük, hogy ugye ez a folyamat tovább tud folytatódni, hiszen mind a magyar kormány, mind az Európai Unió jelentős összegekkel támogatja ugye ennek a kulturális örökségnek a helyreállítását.
And the restoration of this cultural heritage is supported by the Hungarian government and the European Union, so we do hope that we can continue this work.
Ugye természetesen ugye több olyan adósság van ma Magyarországon, amit adósságot törleszteni kell.
We do have to repay some debts in Hungary, and we need to repay them.
Ugye természetesen ebben a témában, hiszen azt mondjuk, hogy ugye Magyarországon még mindig nagyjából 15 olyan tömegsír található, ahol magyar zsidókat végeztek ki vegyesen, legyen az ortodox, neológ, teljesen mindegy, hogy micsoda, és ezeknek az embereknek a tömegsírjai.
For example, we know about 15 mass graves where people, Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews, have been murdered, executed and buried.
Ezek közül ugye Kőszegen található a Kelet-Európa legnagyobb tömegsírja, Kőszeg mellett az erdőben.
Near to the city of Kőszeg in the forest can be found the largest Jewish mass grave in Eastern Europe.
Ahol még mindig több mint 1000 munkaszolgálatosnak a holtteste fekszik.
Where have been around 1000 forced laborers can be found.
Remélhetően a jövő év folyamán el tudjuk kezdeni a helyszínen egy emlékparknak a létrehozását.
And hopefully from the beginning of next year we can start building up a memorial park for them.
De hát ugye, hogy ne csak a halottakról beszéljünk, ugye, ahogy mondani szokták.
But I don't want to talk about only the deads.
Hanem ugye beszéljünk egy kicsit az élőkről is.
So let's talk about a little bit about the living.
Ugye az általunk a zsidó civil közéletbe fordított pénznek a túlnyomó többsége ugye oktatásról, nevelésről, Izraelről is szólnak.
So all the funds that we do provide is mostly about culture, education and the support of Israel.
Hiszen nagyon, nagyon fontos feladat, hogy a magyar zsidó fiatalok visszataláljanak azokhoz a gyökereikhez, amiktől elszakadtak vagy ők, vagy a szüleik, vagy a nagyszüleik.
Because we do consider it very important to help the Hungarian young Jewish people to find the roots of their heritage, which have been severed by their parents or grandparents.
És ugye a civil szervezetek által létrehozott zseniális programokon keresztül is sikerül ugye ezeket a fiatalokat visszavezetni a zsidó identitásukhoz, a zsidó öntudatukhoz.
And if we can succeed in leading back these young people to their roots by the help of the great projects of civil societies.
És természetesen ezeket az alávaló ortodox zsidókat figyelmen kívül hagyva,
and just not ignoring all these Orthodox Jews that we have been talked about.
ugye próbáljuk a fiatalokban kialakítani azért az Izraellel való kapcsolatot is.
We try to help and strengthen the feeling in these young people, the feelings towards Israel.
Hiszen vitathatatlanul a vallásos zsidóságnak köszönheti a mai zsidóság azt, hogy fönnmaradt 3337 évig.
Because it is not a question that today's Jewish people can thank for the religious Jews for the survival of more than 3,000 years.
Ugyanakkor ugye Izrael léte a 21. században a zsidó identitásnak az elválaszthatatlan része.
And the existence of the state of Israel is an unseparable part of the Jewish identity.
És ugye természetesen beszélni kell az antiszemitizmusról is, hiszen ezért vagyunk itt gyakorlatilag.
And of course we need to talk about anti-Semitism because this is the main reason that why we are here.
De amikor néhány hónappal ezelőtt megkérdeztek egy ilyen kormányzati egyeztetésen, hogy mi a véleményem a hazai antiszemitizmusról,
I've been asked by Hungarian government meeting, what do I think about the Hungarian anti-Semitism?
ugye azt mondtam, hogy azért, amikor én megfordulok egy bevásárlóközpontba, vagy sétálok a zsidó negyedbe, akkor elég nehéz mondjuk egy tájföldi turistának hinni.
And I told them that for me it is quite difficult to appear like a Far Eastern Asian tourist when I enter a shopping center or in the downtown Budapest.
Hát mert ugye
Because
egy ilyen alávaló ortodox zsidó vagyok,
I look like
fekete
these Orthodox Jews.
kikába, hosszú fehér szakállal, még a cicesz is szokott lógni a nadrágomból.
Long beard, kippah, and the tzitzot.
Hát eléggé fölismerhető vagyok.
So I'm quite recognizable.
Ugye nyilván hazudnék, hogyha azt mondanám, hogy nem érik a magamfajtát atrocitások.
I would like to tell that I have never been met atrocities.
Volt például ilyenre is, olyanra is, fizikai atrocitásra is, szóbeli atrocitásra is.
There has been both kinds of physical and verbal atrocities I experienced.
Hát ugye, aki fizikai atrocitásra vágyik velem, ugye azért elég rossz lóra teszi a fogadását.
But there have quite bad chances if someone wants to attack me physically.
De ugye nyilván ezek a szóbeli és fizikai atrocitások ugye nagyon érdekes jellemzője van, hiszen az esetek 80%-ában nem magyar emberektől hangzik.
But I also need to add that more than 80% of these verbal and physical atrocities have been committed by non-Hungarians.
Tehát ugye a zsidó negyedben sétál, ugye a bulinélet kellős közepén, ahogy mondani szokták, ugye én ott lakom, Veselényi utca, Nagydióf utca sarka, tehát mindennek a szívében.
So I live in the downtown of downtown Budapest, where the Jewish quarter meets the party life Budapest district.
És ugye amikor az ember már különös képességeket fejleszt ki, hogy ugye hogyan menjen át az utca egyik oldaláról a másikra, ugye nagyobb külföldi csoportokkal találkozva.
And I do have a strategy of how to cross the one side of the street to the other when there are larger foreign groups approaching.
Hiszen nem kellemes egy alkoholgőzös angol vagy francia turista csoport közepébe keveredni, ugye kaftánban és nagy fekete kalapban.
So it is sometimes not a nice experience to confront to me directly a larger alcohol-influenced British group of tourists and young people.
Ugye a legfinomabb kifejezés is a kill Jewish, shut Jewish és hasonló megjegyzések.
Because it's the most soft expression they tell that kill Jews or stop Jews.
Tehát nyilván van még mit tenni ugye antiszemitizmus tekintetében.
So we do have an effort and we do have things to do in this respect.
Mindezzel együtt ugye azt szoktuk mondani, hogy ugye azért Európában Magyarország még mindig az egyik legbiztonságosabb ország ugye a zsidók számára.
But at the same time, we have to tell that Hungary is one of the safest country in Europe for the Jewish people.
Bár a folyamatok nem biztos, hogy mindenkinket támogatnak mindenben.
However, it looks like the tendencies are not always supporting this direction, supporting us.
De minden esetre megőrizzük az optimista mi voltunkat.
But we will keep our optimism.
Köszönöm szépen, hogy meghallgattam.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was a fascinating set of discussions of Hungarian history and Judaism. I suppose the initial question that occurred to me in the context of Jehuda Hartmann's paper is the astonishing rapidity with which the events of 44 unfolded, given that before that the Hungarian Jewish community seemed to be relatively okay with the haughty regime. And then the catastrophe that occurred seems to come out of, it seems to be completely unexpected. And yet in the wider community, there seems to have been a general suspicion of Jews that is historic and almost ever present. Why do you think there was such a lack of awareness in the Jewish community about the general background of hostility?
I think that somehow the Jews in Hungary identified, they looked at Hungary as a package, I mean, the whole thing, but there were two components. There was the government, which had all kind of reasons to not support or not bring the Holocaust to Hungary. On the other hand, there were sentiments and there were feelings among the people. And I think there was no clear distinction between these two components. And what happened that up to March 1944, the government was in control. Even the extreme right that came in October somehow maintained I'm sorry, not this one, but up to March, the government was in control, and that was the situation. So the Jews were more or less in relative safety. But when the Germans invaded, the Hungarian public came into the picture because they had to facilitate, find Jews all over the little places in Karpatorus, there were thousands of little places in the provinces where Jews were living, and the local authorities had to now, to find them and to bring them to the train stations and to send them away. So that was the change. I mean, at this point, the control went from the government to the people, or something like that. It's a rough distinction, but
Well, thank you.
more or less. I mean,
I wonder if anybody else had any comments on that.
1920-től ugye a nyilas hatalom átvételi.
But if we do follow the chain of events from the 1920 to the Aerocross regime,
Azért azt nem lehet mondani, hogy olyan gyorsan történtek volna a dolgok, hiszen szép folyamatosan, pontosan egy generáció 25 év alatt sikerült átformálni a gondolkodását társadalmi csoportoknak.
The process has been quite slow. It took a life of a generation, 20-25 years to transform the thinking of the population.
És ugye nyilván, hogy hogyan lehetett egyrészt a többségi társadalom gondolkodását átformálni, megtörni, módosítani. Ugye nem az én tisztem megítélni, hogy ez hogyan történt, de hát megtörtént.
It's not my task to decide how this could have happened, but the transformation of the thinking and of a complete generation. But anyway, it has happened.
Vagyis inkább azt mondhatnánk, hogy hogyan sikerült a csöndes többséget még csöndesebbé tenni.
I think we can raise the question like that. How could it be possible to make the silent majority even more silent?
És ugye a csöndes többségnek a hallgatása, és ugye természetesen egy bizonyos társadalmi csoportnak a hangossága az, ami egy olyan tragédiába vezetett, ami ugye 600 000 magyar zsidó életébe került.
So it took the life of 600,000 Jews, the silence of the silent majority and the loudness of a minority that led to this tragedy.
Hiszen a nyilas terror tombolásának ugye idézőjelben ugye néhány tízezer halottja volt.
Because we can say that the reign of the Arrow-Cross terror has been taken the life of so-called just a few tens of thousands of people directly.
A többséget ugye a társadalom néma hallgató többségének az elfordulásával, a nem tudomásul vételének a kihasználásával sikerült meggyilkolni.
The most of the victims have been deported and killed with the help of the silent majority, their silent contribution.
Körülbelül ennyi.
So maybe this is what I can add to this question.
Thank you. My question is that, in your view, to what extent the Hungarian society has recognized the responsibility of the Hungarian society for what happened and how it happened. Once Agnes Heller said at the protest at the German occupation memorial that András Kovács mentioned in his talk, that the Hungarian Holocaust would not have happened without the Nazi occupation of Hungary and without the very active participation of the Hungarian administration. And the memorial is there, but again, what András Kovács mentioned, which is kind of blurs the picture about the responsibility. So how do you see this? And I am hopeful that at least we are going to the direction of recognizing the responsibility, as also recognizing what has been also said in the first talk of this panel, that Hungary was indeed a space where there was a relative safety. Of course, we cannot set aside Kamenets Podolsk, and that already people died in extremely brutal ways there. Anyway, I don't want to talk even longer. Thank you.
Oké, tehát én hozzá vagyok szokva, hogy a kellemetlen kérdések általában nálam landolnak.
I do accustom that the most difficult questions are directed to me.
Nyilván az emlékműnek a kérdés, hogy nagyon érdekes kérdés.
So it's a very interesting interviewing question, the question of the memorial.
Nem gondolom, és abszolút nem gondolom, hogy ennek az emlékműnek az üzenete bármilyen formában is zsidó vagy zsidóság ellenes lenne.
I don't think that the message of this memorial is in any way anti-Jewish, could be regarded as anti-Jewish.
Bárki, aki ebben az emlékműbe bármilyen antiszemita véleményt vagy felmondót kíván belefűzni vagy belemagyarázni,
anybody who wants to connect anti-Semitic message to this memorial
de politikai manipulációt kíván végrehajtani.
wants to act a political manipulation.
Ugye, mint ahogy Héberül is rajta van ugye az emlékműn, hogy ugye az áldozatok emlékére persze sokat lehet ezen vitatkozni.
As the inscription on the monument in Hebrew, as far as I can remember, this is to the memory of the victims.
De nyilván bizonyos történelmi eseményeket egy kisebbségi társadalom tagjaként,
as a member of the minority in a society,
ugye más szemszögből kell, hogy nézze az ember.
we need to take a different approach and different point of view.
Még akkor is, hogyha azt gondoljuk, hogy nem mindenben értünk egyet a többségi társadalommal.
Even if we think that we do not agree in every aspect with the majority society,
Még akkor is, amikor akarmatlanul, de inkább akaratlanul nem elég érzékenyen viszonyulnak ugye az érzékeny pontjainkhoz.
even if we feel that the majority is not always very empathetic, willingly or unwillingly, towards our sensitive points.
Yes.
So maybe that's my answer.
Ask more questions during the break of our fascinating panelists and join us for a next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you.